talk before, please send me your information. I'll get it up there. I'm going to go around collecting as much information as I can. And the profile actually links to talks you've given in the past. So, yeah, if you want to actually share that with somebody, you can. I don't know why this is so slow. I lost my mouse. All right, so we have some news. We are officially sponsored now by Wildlands. They'll be helping us provide some of the food and beverages, and as well as a little thank you gift for our speakers moving forward. So, and of course, a big shout out to Fuse for letting us use the facility, and Wheelhouse for providing us with plenty of drinks and soda for the coming months. So that's a pretty big move for us, and we are very grateful to Wildlands for sponsoring us. So I found this quote by Richard Feynman. If you want to master something, explain it. And that was kind of the whole reason behind this meetup is, if you want to become better at something, the best way to do it is by teaching others and distribute that information. So if you ever want to give a talk about something, or you just want to do a deep dive into some subject, I encourage you to give a talk. And I think you'll find out that you can really master a subject that way. You can really explain it because you have to explain it. So next month is still open for presentation. If you want to give a talk, please get with me or Kevin, or just submit it on the website. And then today, Chad will be talking on starting an Ember-Rails application. So, all right, Chad, you ready? Yeah. All right.
Where are you live streaming to?
Twitch. Sorry,
Twitch.
I didn't mention that.
Is it on? Is it full stack there?
It's full stack TC.
At Twitch.
Yep.
Okay. Send it to someone else.
And we do have a YouTube channel that we were uploading videos to in the past. We'll probably continue to upload them there as well as Twitch. So, and then we'll link every talk on the website as well. And we do have meeting notes as well. If you don't know, it's on GitHub, full stack TC. Chad already uploaded his notes and his presentation up there, so you can go check it out.
All right, so just put the headset on. So I'm really big on formatting and colors. So Chad Zink, that's who I am, and I'm going to be talking about just getting started into Rails Ember application. And so I think with this audience, we can actually maybe cover a lot of stuff, and then maybe ask more questions and dive in a little bit if we want to about more than just starting, but looking into some other aspects of the application. The stack. Anyways, so about me, I was just talking a second ago, but I am a software developer and a department manager now over at Wildland, and I actually spent 15 years of my career doing Microsoft only. So much so that we had some younger developers come in and they would say, we have these really cool technologies in Linux that we think we could use, and we'd be like, sure, and then we would say, no, it doesn't fit our stack, and we'd push that technology away. But at a certain point, I decided that I was going to give it all up, and I came to work at Wildland, and I was working with some really cool people. One of them here is Joe, and we have Kevin as well, but also lots of other people who've kind of shown me the light, and now it's totally OS X, and those Linux people, they're still, but it's all OS X. Yeah. But I've only spent the last 2 years actually in the Rails Ember technology stack. So like Michael was saying, I want to become an expert in this. So I really kind of focused a lot, especially the last year, on getting to know this better and becoming more of an expert. So one of the things was they had this magic. If you wanted to set up a new Rails app, you run all this magical scripts and it all just works. And I never really understood how it worked or why it worked because I was too busy learning other things. But this is an opportunity to kind of really dive into that and see what was going on with the magic. But I am a full stack developer, which requires me to know a lot about different things, but not really be an expert in anything in particular. So, and I'm local. I graduated from CBC, went to WSU, then went back to CBC, then went back to WSU. I have like 4 degrees, but it's fun learning, so I like it. One of the things that I'm really interested in right now is smart home technology. I wanted to kind of just mention that because you got to keep your interests going, otherwise you get bored. And so the next thing I was going to do is kind of talk about the group that we have here. Now we have a really small group, and most of us kind of introduced each other already, but maybe we can kind of just take a quick moment for anybody that doesn't know and just kind of answer a few questions. But we start with Michael. I think everybody knows him, so we can skip since he's eating.
Yeah, so my name is Michael, if I didn't mention that before. I'm a software developer by day. And when I'm not doing that, I'm spending time with 2 little girls, my wife. I like doing this on the side too.
Do you have a favorite technology you're interested in right now?
Right now, for this month, probably Kubernetes.
Ah, nice. Okay.
So I'm Timothy Steele. I go to school at BYU, Idaho, in studying computer science. And I'm interested in mobile websites and mobile apps. I haven't done too much with that. I made a very simple Android app for a business consultant, and that was a couple of years ago. And right now I'm working on a senior project where I'm trying to make a simple university events webpage that is a good mobile web experience because there's really no mobile web experience right now. That's something I'm working on.
Perfect. Cool. All right.
I'm Michael Ballard. I'm a mechanical engineer working on reliability center maintenance, spearheading the development of that program for the company. I'm dabbling in Xamarin and C# for a mobile app project on
Nice.
I'm Brendan Davis, senior at Delta High School. I'm mostly just here to learn because I'm just interested in getting started in coding, scripting, programming in general, software development if I can. Trying to do things like one of my interests Timothy? Yeah, one of my interests has been creating mobile apps just to help both myself and any future colleagues or peers or just people in general with day-to-day manual tasks that would make it easier to do with just an app.
Okay.
Trevor Martin, electrical engineer, and one of the other reasons I'm here because another company I'm working with is looking for an SQL expert, but it doesn't seem like we have that many, so I'll just throw that out there. Any SQL experts? There's a startup in this town looking, and then talking about some smart home stuff later.
Actually, I'd rather talk to you about SQL later, but
Okay, no, let's do that.
okay.
So,
Microsoft SQL Server? Or?
probably MySQL, maybe Postgres, Linux backend, not Windows backend.
All right.
Joe Weekly. I work with Chad and Kevin and a few other people at Wildland. Tech stack I'm just interested in, probably even Johnny 5 and Node. So it's a robotics library with Node. That's probably the hobby, the current one.
Yeah, it's kind of a tough question, but anyway, so thanks. It kind of helps me put a little bit of context around what I'm talking about because I don't want to bore you guys. So we'll kind of keep it at some level interesting, hopefully. But so I kind of laid out using some diagrams that I found, but as well as kind of making this diagram of kind of what I see as a web app. And this is basics. There's a lot more to it, but you kind of split things up into the front end and the back end. You have 2 servers essentially. Usually you have a web server, but you also kind of have an application server. And so sometimes these are the same thing, sometimes they're slightly different. I like to think of them as different things, but you've got mostly like presentation stuff on the web server. So you've got your HTML, your JavaScript, your CSS, and that kind of works with the client browser. And on the back end, it kind of delivers those components to the front end with the back end stuff. So your web APIs, your data access layer, files potentially in your database. So this is just generalized what you would see potentially for a web application, or at least one version of it. And then when we look at the Rails Ember application, I just kind of took out the parts that were there is generalized and kind of narrowed it down a little bit and said, well, on our front end, we're actually going to be using a technology or a style called handlebars, and it kind of mixes HTML with some specialized markup to give you a little bit more functionality on the front end, as well as we're going to be using the Ember-JS. So that's your JavaScript. So we're going to take JavaScript out and put Ember-JS in. And then we've got Bootstrap 4, which is kind of intertwined with those two technologies for our web server. So that's our front end. And then on our back end, we have the Rails we're going to use for our API layer. So that's our RESTful calls where we tell the server what kind of information we need. And then that's using something called Active Record, which is an ORM, Object Relational Model. So it says, I'm going to write code to create SQL and then give you back data to the user. And so you see this, an Active Record is the Rails thing. You'll call it, Microsoft has a Link is their flavor for that, and then there's a couple of other ORMs that are used. And then for the file I/O, I just put Ruby I/O, because there are sometimes you use file I/O, but a lot of times you'll actually use like S3, where you're actually sending stuff over to Amazon and storing your files over there. And then we work with Postgres. You can use MySQL, you can use Postgres. In this example, I'm going to stick with Postgres because I'm running OS X, and it's really easy to run Postgres for this type of demonstration. So then I kind of said, well, what do you need to know if you're going to write this kind of application? And this list got a little bigger than I had expected, but these are like narrowing it down from there. As the true fashion of full stack, you really should know Ruby. You should kind of understand how that language works in general, or at least know where to go, the Ruby language, and look up what you need to know. As well as Rails convention, and this is what always gets me, is you need to put the files in certain places and you have to name them certain things. You have to have the class names, a very specific thing. And it's all intertwined together so that you're following a really strict convention. And then you should know the API stuff. This is your RESTful API things is like, I want to get data, I want to put data out, I want to delete data, and that's kind of that layer between the front end and the back end, how things flow. So, likewise on the front end, most people are hopefully learning JavaScript, but I put up some links in here too to kind of help out with that. I like to use Mozilla the most, but there's lots of JavaScript sources. And then I found a really interesting spot to look up handlebars, which kind of explains kind of what handlebars is. And we'll see a little bit at the end of this, some handlebar stuff, but it's not terribly, I'm not going to cover it in great detail. And then of course, just like Rails, Ember is a very opinionated front end framework, and it's kind of like you need to put things in certain places for it to work. And if you don't put things there, it says, oh, I'm just going to do what you kind of probably want. And so it kind of has default settings a lot of times. And then this is the part that always gets me, is that even within my own system, I'm like, I got it all set up, I'm going to be able to do this thing, and then it doesn't work. And so I kind of said, well, I need to jot down some information about what I'm using, and so that other people could simulate the same thing. So I am using Git and Ruby and Node, and then I have suggestions for, and this was taught to me, the Ruby version manager, meaning that I can actually run multiple versions of Ruby with multiple versions of different applications installed. So if you have never heard of a version manager before, they're really helpful for kind of setting up your system. Has anybody here not heard of a version manager? Okay. Oh, okay, cool.
Kind of new to working on it.
Okay, yeah, so what you find is, like, if you're using certain open source tools, or you started a project 5 years ago and they upgraded Ruby, for example, and you're kind of like, oh, it works great with this version, but Rails is a better example. And then they bumped it up, and you want to start something new with the new version of Rails, but you want your old program to still run. So you kind of say, well, I'm going to do a version management where when I'm working on this project, I'm telling it to use this version. When I'm working on this project, I'm telling it to use this version. And you can run them both on the same computer without any interference, hopefully.
Cool.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that, coming from Windows, it was really strange, because in Windows, at least it always felt this way of like, you just have one version of Rails, like just deal with that. And that's what you get to use. And so make sure there's a lot of backwards compatibility.
How do you like RB and V versus RVM?
I switched to RBE&V, and I can't remember why, but I was told that it was better. It actually, it seems to work really well. I had some problems with, what was the other one again? It was RVM. Yeah, I had some issues with that one where it wasn't managing the different things the way I expected to, and so I just switched. And it was one of those things where I maybe didn't give it enough of a chance. I just switched over to the other one. And then I'm using OS X, but you can actually do most of what I'm talking about, you can actually do in Linux. I was just kidding before. But with Windows, I've tried it, and it gets really complicated, and to the point where I don't know, I just use Linux. And so, when I was getting into this, I was realizing something that's really important is that there are all kinds of online guides for doing something like this. And there's lots of people who are much better educated than I am. So I found a couple of them that were interesting, which was kind of like just a generic how to start an Ember-Rails thing and use their CLI. And there was another one that was discussing specifically using Cordova, which uses the ability to like create these mobile apps. And so using this stack in that area, that was kind of interesting. So I put those in there. But for my example today, I'm actually sticking with what we call the Trailhead, which is an open source project that we've kind of carried along for a while, but we're not sure how long we're going to keep. So I'm using an older version of it that seems to be working. We've been trying to update it, but we may not keep it going. So we'll have to see how it goes. But what we find is that there's this standard process. So when you first build your first Rails Ember app, you can go to the guides online and you can get a really bare bones basic thing. Then you're like, oh, well, I need to add this in, and I need to add this in, and then you start adding all these little things in. And you're like, if I could just put all this in a package and store it, so next time I start an app, I can just have it all spin up. And so that's what I'm doing. And we're pulling in 3 other open source libraries that we have, which is for authentication and for creating the APIs. So those are the 3 most useful open source libraries that we have. We have another one that's designed specifically for front end, which we'll be pulling in as well. But we don't really have a lot of time to talk about those, I don't think. We'll see. I should stop for a second, though, and ask if anybody has any questions. We're kind of going quickly through this. We're bored already, or we're still good? Okay, cool, because we're going to get started on stuff soon. This is all just setup, really. So this is a general list of kind of what I'm trying to do. Is I'm trying to say that I'm going to build a web app, and it's going to have multiple users. There's going to be a sign-up process, and then there's going to be a login process that they'll do. And I should be able to have data access where I can read and write some data. There's a lot more that you'll probably want with your web app, but that's just the first step into getting your web app up and running. So after that, I just need to start actually creating the web app. So the process that I'm going to do here probably should take between 5 and 20 minutes, so I think we've got plenty of time actually. Let's see, so we're going to open up our console and we're going to follow the instructions. Okay, so one of the things that I have here is a file that is my RBE&V, and I'm going to just double check that one here. And I don't think I have to have this file, but it does help me. So I'm just double checking, and that's probably pretty small, but that's the version of Ruby that I'm going to be using for this demonstration. That looks good. I'm gonna close these other tabs, close this stuff. I'm not a good console user. I don't use Vim. I use Atom. And I need to switch to another one soon. Let's see. So looks like our version of Ruby is good, and I can verify that by running a command over here, RBE&V local. Looks like that's good.
Can you bump your font size up?
Let's see.
Just use Control Plus.
That would make sense. Command, yeah. Is that better?
Get better.
I'd like to change the whole resolution, but okay.
I'm like the old part of the room, Karen.
The what?
I'm like the old part of the room.
Oh. Well, then this is much smaller than I'd like to.
It was small for us too.
Okay. And I won't feel bad about being grumpy. These kids and their small fonts.
And then I also need to check to make sure my node version is good. So NVM, LS, so those are all. What's that?
NVM news.
Ah, yes. And it looks like I am right on the right version. But this is a good example. These are all the different versions of Node that I have running on my system. So, but I'm currently using 6.1 or 6.11.3. So that looks good. And then I just want to make sure there's this little icon up here in the top. It tells me whether or not Postgres is running. So I usually have to check that just to make sure. And these are all steps that I don't usually have to take. I'm just doing it because I'm going to run something that's going to take a while. And if it doesn't work, it's going to crash in the middle, and I don't want it to do that. So, well, actually, I think Joe programmed it to tell me that it's not going to work before it crashes. So it says you're not ready yet. But it looks like I've passed all my checks, and I'm going to run this command here, and just double check we are in the folder. I have a backup of what I'm going to do just in case this doesn't work for some reason. But I should be able to say, I'm telling Rails to create a new application called sample app, and then I'm telling it to go to this GitHub repo and use the template. And then I'm also telling it to use Postgres, which this is really small. It's just, ooh. Telling it to use Postgres, and then I'm telling it to skip Spring and skip turbo links, which I just think they're evil things. I don't really know what they do. Anyways, so now it's going through the process of generating my template application. And Rails is like this. Like it says, I want a new app, and I just want you to go and make it. So it makes a folder. And Joe can correct me if I'm wrong on this stuff. So it says I need a new app, and so go out and follow all the conventions and create all of these files for me. You see this in Visual Studio too now, where they have like a starter app or something like that you just say, I just want a new application, and then it does all of that for you. And right now it's telling me that I do not have Ember CLI, so I'm going to do nvm install npm. Thank you. CLI.
You probably need a -G.
All right. That's probably why it just wasn't working. So npm is Node Package Manager, and I'm installing globally the Ember command line interface stuff at version 2.15.1. That should be what I need. And npm install is like the thing that you learn to dread because you never know how it's going to go or how long it's going to take. Well, you do, but it does take a while. So you spend a lot of time staring at this thing down here. This should actually go fairly quickly.
So when building this framework, do you have something to, all the modules that you would put in this or pieces, were they on the command line that you gave it, or is there another file where you would make more requests of the modules and the pieces for this new project?
It's a good question. I think I understand what you asked. So
because otherwise, if the framework's that simple, I mean, do you not just have a directory you copy? Because that's what I do, is I copy something to change the names. But it sounds like here it's setting up certain things based on what you need.
Yeah, I think, well,
Install dependencies too. Probably some libraries have dependencies, install those.
Okay.
And it could be
Oh, adding that. Okay, doing the dependencies.
yeah. So I think that is a good point. So I've seen like a template or boilerplate repository where you just pull that repository down, change it to your application, and then you're good to go. One of the advantages of kind of using this type of template is that you can make it a lot more customizable, so you're not like targeting specific versions of things, for example. So it's like you're not left with the version of a gem that you had 2 years ago. You could have a version that's just released the other day, and it'll grab that.
Yeah.
So it kind of.
So you're pulling the freshest source of everything, but I mean, how many different, when you make this new project, how many different permutations or options do you really have there? I mean, I saw you selected the database Postgres.
Yeah.
Versus MySQL or whatever. I mean, how many other little granularity selections did you have there?
In this particular case, mostly the thing I'm most concerned about is the application name. I wanted to use a specific application name because it's going to like name the database after that, and it's going to name a few other things here and there within the template after that application.
Okay. The configurations for how to get to the database name, this project name gets poked in all over the code.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that there's no confusion about what it is. But also, this strategy allows me to make this process more advanced as I go. It's programmatic instead of just copying.
Yeah.
But I think at the stage that it's at now, and maybe this is why we're not seeing a lot of need for it necessarily, is that you do run into that challenge yourself. You're saying, well, I could just kind of copy this example that I have, or I could try to run the builder.
Yeah, I poured my own code. And I just
Yeah.
global replace.
And then you don't have to worry about all of this. Well, you do have to. So one of the things that is nice about this is that if this doesn't work, then you're probably going to have problems running the application as well. So because it's using the same tools.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't get this to work, then but yeah. So I did kind of skip over that a little bit, but I've got the skipping things. Those are tags that I can use. The database name. This is the template that I'm using, which is just a Ruby file. And then this is the name of the application here. So let's call this.
You could do Rails new -h, and it would spit out there's a ton of options. Like if you don't set the database to Postgres, it defaults. It picks a default for you. So there's a whole bunch of other defaults that are going on there.
Okay.
Yep. So all of my options, I can tell it how I want it to generate this particular thing. So all I'm doing is I'm using Rails' built-in new command, but I'm also giving it a template to start with to copy all these other things around. Better fix my application name. We'll call it new app this time, so it's not the same. Okay. So then it's asking me some questions too. I do want to use Baby School. And that's a change. I think they dropped some of the support for Squeal and switched to Baby School. I think it's going to ask me another question too about whether I want to include authentication. So if I was building something that I knew wasn't going to need somebody to log into it, I would say no, I don't want authentication. But in this case, I'll probably say yes for this example. So it does quite a bit of stuff, and it's nice on one hand, and then copying files from a directory is a lot quicker. But it is going out and updating and grabbing stuff as we go.
Oh yeah, no, just the fact that you're going to pull new libraries and everything makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that as we go as a company, we'll have, if we keep going in this direction with this kind of template or trailhead, we'll have some pretty advanced ones. Right now we're Rails and Ember. We've got that kind of down, but we're moving into other stuff, and we'll probably have trailheads that maybe you pick the platform you want to run. So if you wanted to do a React thing, and I see just making more work for Joe.
I mean, it'd be nice if it set up where you're picking the different versions, and it could interact with RB, ENV, and NVM, and auto do and check out. So it's more like choose your own adventure style.
Yeah, exactly. So that you're just kind of saying, oh yeah, I'm using this right now.
You were eaten by a wheel.
So while
Like
this,
you lose the internet connection.
yeah, that would be. These might lose it. So this will be running, and then what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go back over, and we're going to generate the token authentication stuff. We're going to set up. There's a little bit of an install thing that we need to go. There's also a workaround. Found a bug earlier today. Didn't have time to fix it. but I need it to generate the migration files, but then I have to go take out the extra routes that it adds into the file.
What's the migration file?
Okay. So this was actually really cool because when I was working at the Microsoft shop, we kind of had this concept in mind, but we would keep track of all of our SQL commands that we would do. Migration file is really neat because it's focused on the database, and it says, it's like a state machine for the database. We say, okay, well, we're going to change the database, we're going to add this table to the database, and I'm going to log that change as this is what you do to apply it, and this is what you do to roll it back. So you have these migrations where you say, I'm going to apply this change to the database, but I'm also providing a backward step. So you always have your forward and backward on your kind of state machine. And so it works really well for both changing the structure of the database as well as adding data to the database. So if you wanted to take a single table and break it up into two tables, this is something that can be very problem causing. But you can easily do this with the migration and just say, okay, well, I'm going to create these two new tables. I'm going to pull the data out of those tables and put the one table and put it into those two tables, and I'm going to drop that other table off. As likewise, you'd write a migration that says, well, I'm going to take the data from these two tables, make one table with it, and I'm going to drop those other two tables back off. So you just kind of forward and backward thing.
And the point to be able to do it on a live or with very little downtime, I presume, is to be able to change the database in your code at the same time very quickly? Is that
yes,
the
and
migration?
Yeah, and it also keeps, so yeah, it does the fast thing, but it also keeps it so that you can run like a production version of the database and a
Testing version?
yeah, testing version of it as two separate things, and understand that the version of the code that you're working with relates to the version of that migration that you're currently on. So if you're on version 2 on your production, but you're on version 2.5, you can have different migrations that are stored in your repository that are not, because that's one of the big problems with databases is you can't really, it's not always easy to say, this is the version of the database that I'm currently running.
This one, you use your store database back to the state.
Yeah. In fact, I did some work on,
Scheme, I presume.
Yeah,
Not necessarily
scheme.
data, yeah, okay, because you want to keep all the data that went in since as you go forward and backward. Okay.
Yeah, for data, you can have like C files that then take data for local testing.
Oh, for the testing purpose, yeah.
yeah, you do have a seats as well. Oh, need to answer.
It lets you have revision control for your database, kind of. You're like, this chunk of code needs this tweak to the database, and it's all in one commit.
Yeah, and similar to what Django has, I guess, in that realm.
Mhm.
Okay.
In fact, I was doing a .NET project, just kind of playing around, and I was seeing that they now have like a really easy to use migration process where I was like, so this is kind of the industry standard now.
They're learning some good stuff from Lonic, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, actually, I was running a .NET project on my Mac, so I was using Visual Studio for OS X, and then I was connecting it to a SQL server on Amazon. So it was.
Okay, so Microsoft isn't up to speed with this yet.
No, they are, but it was just interesting because I was using some of their stuff, and I was having problems with it because it was like the OS X version of Visual Studio was like, I don't know what you're doing.
Were you running .NET Core?
What's that?
Were you running .NET Core?
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah, I think I was
That
version.
runs fully on Linux, actually.
Yeah, it does. And I was running version 1. I think that's what the problem was at, and it was on version 2. And so version 2 had some of the upgrades that I needed.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I do like to play around with some of the Microsoft stuff, but I'm pretty happy with what I can do in Linux, OS X type stuff. Let's see, I'm gonna go while this is running. This is taking more time than I thought it would, but so after we create our, we're gonna generate some migrations that we need to run and clean up our route, and then we're going to create a really basic model through our API resource. So when we do this install, it's pulling in this API tool that helps us build things. And we're going to create a test model, and we're just going to give it 3 attributes, which is label, max, and min. And then we'll go ahead and set up the database, and then kind of patch up the route file a little bit more with some stuff that was supposed to be created but didn't get created the way I thought it would. And then we can actually start our Rails server. So that'll be our backend server, And so in this particular example, I really am isolating out the front end server and the back end server as two different things that during my development process will continue to be that way. And then when you push it up to like a hosted stuff, you'll kind of merge them together, I think. I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question actually. Let's go check on our stuff. Looks like we're done. Got all these things done. Don't see any errors. Better just quick, oh. Okay. I might have to come back to that. Won't be too much of a problem though. I'm sorry, I should back up a little bit. So this is telling me that there was a missing package for a text mask that I had. I tried to run Ember authenticate me. So it means that I'll probably need to run this as well, which I think I have in my notes. So I'm not too worried about it. But if I look in my directory now, I should have this new app folder. So I can change that to that directory. And I can see that I've got a bunch of stuff now. In fact, I'm going to go into Atom and I'm going to add that project folder real quick so that I can see what's going on. A little bit easier. And I apologize because this is really small. Can you guys even see that? But all of my Rails stuff that I'm usually going to be modifying is going to be in this app folder. All of my front end stuff is going to be in the app Ember folder. And then I've got bin and configuration stuff for Rails that's kind of put over here. So this is where my route file is before I mess with it. So let's take care of this one first. Hopefully I'm giving you guys something that you expect or that you can use. We can talk about all kinds of stuff. We don't have to even talk about this. Okay, so what I was doing it there is telling it to generate the token authenticate me install process, which it should have done during the original template. And so it's telling me that it did generate some extra stuff, but it did find some identical stuff as well. And so that would be something we would create an issue and we'd say, okay, on our open source project, there's something going on with this where it didn't generate it correctly. So we'll go back into that. And I know from experience earlier today that it created this twice, which will cause me a problem. So I'm going to take that one out, and that's just mounting the authentication to the routes that I'm going to use. Okay. Anyways, the other thing I wanted to do is I wanted to create a sample model because I think it's really important to see what it looks like to see the data on that back end and the data on the front end, how those two go. So this command is Rails telling it to generate using this resource or this tool, a resource that has this name, test model, and it has these three attributes. And I can put more attributes on it if I wanted to. I could say it's one called K that is a, I think decimal might be a valid one. Actually, more interesting would be JSON. And every time I run a command like this, it's going to tell, it's going to crash like that. So this is one of the things I had to get used to with working at Wildland, is actually reading these messages, because oftentimes with Windows especially, you get a lot more in-your-face notifications that say, hey, there's a problem over here. But this usually tells you exactly what you need to do. So in this particular case, it's telling me
Duplicate routing.
Oh, it's in my router. Oh, that's because I didn't save the changes. Thanks, Joe. Okay, so this is what I expected to see. It was basically, I wanted it to tell me that it created a new migration file for me, it created a new model file for me, and then it created some testing files, kind of like stubbing things out so that I can go back and make those a little bit more robust later. So this is one of the things that I really like about Rails, that I've gotten used to and really appreciate, is that it does a lot of things for me. And because I'm using an API tool that I've used before and I'm comfortable with, I knew that it was going to create this path for my controller. Because in Rails, you have controllers, models, policies, and serializers. And controllers are kind of like your endpoints. That's where you're going to kind of go when you make your RESTful calls. Your model is kind of your class definition. Like this is the class file. Your policy is kind of like who's allowed to do what to these things. So you can restrict access, where if you say, I only want these attributes of this to be permitted. And so that helps out. And then the serializer is, how does it get compressed into different outputs? And what we're most concerned about with Ember is the JSON output. It's like, how does it take the class and convert it into a JSON object?
So the policies and the serializers, Chad?
Yes.
Those are actually getting pulled in from our conventions that we built on top of Rails.
Oh, really?
The policies come from Pundit,
Okay.
and the serializers come from the active models. I guess the serializer might be default in Rails now.
Because I've never known anything else. So I've
Yeah,
just,
Rails can come with the policy stuff.
Okay.
We baked that in because we really like that.
yeah. No, I've grown to really appreciate it. So it turns out there's probably some stuff here that's maybe some other things too that aren't necessarily Rails specific, but I don't know enough about.
They're our version of Rails.
Yes, our version of Rails is a good way to put it. But it's things that we find help us out quite a bit because you're going to need this stuff later on. And what's interesting is like if you go into this model and you look at it and you're like, well, this doesn't really tell me anything. It's just it's a class that is getting the application controller and it's including this API me file. But when you kind of go into the application controller, you can start to step back and see what it's doing from there. Let's see, there's also lots of other inherited things. So it's very inherited, lots of different classes, and it does take a while to drill down to what is actually causing things to work, but eventually you do get down to what's going on. One of the things that Joe might be able to help me out with, this is a little bit of a mystery to me still, but when I'm working in, well, we'll come back to that later. We should move forward and see how far we get. Because mostly this is just about getting this template up and running and then getting you started into something. There's a lot of details about Rails that can take hours and weeks and a long time to cover. So, one of the other things that I wanted to show here with this command is that it comes with this rake command, which, does anybody know what that stands for? I've forgotten it, but it,
Ruby make.
Ruby make, that's right. So the make rake command is like a make command, and I think that there's a help for it. So if you needed help with it, you can just look at what you're doing. But in this particular case, I know the commands I want to do. I want to work with the database. I know there's some rake commands that are built into, I think it's Active Record, to create the new database. Then I want to go in and look at my migrations and run all of my migrations. And then I want to go ahead and take the demo and seed the database with the information. Before I run this though, just take a quick look at what I'm talking about. So these are my migrations. They're all stored over here. I'm not seeing the one that I expected for.
That's the one that was that's from the scaffold region.
Yeah, I was looking for the authentication ones. So I had expected to see those. So before I run this, let's try that one more time. The token authenticating. I could have sworn, and maybe it was because I had that I'll look at the output of this and double check it. Serializers. Okay, well, that is why I have a backup. Okay, so I'm going to cheat, and I don't like to cheat, but I don't want to waste too much time either. I created an app earlier today. And this is, I can show you what I'm actually looking for. So I'm looking for these migration files. I should be able to drop these over here. Normally the generator would generate these, and so I'm going to have to create an issue and get those put in there. So this is my token authentication stuff, my session management for logging in. And I need this for our demo later. But this is what, this is a combined command saying that it's both up and down, and so it knows how to reverse this command. And it's creating our token authentication invite table, the users table, creating a bunch of indexes. I won't get into the details, but this is kind of the process that it does for migrations. It's keeping track of all the stuff. This is a really simple one for the test model that we did, where it just says I'm creating a table called test models. It's got these 3 columns on it. So now that I've got that, I should be able to run our command. One more thing. And if I'm going fast, it's because I'm trying to avoid too much trouble, which I thought was taken care of. But, libtask demo rig. That's where it is. So it doesn't have factory bot. This is a change I made yesterday or earlier today. Should be that. Give it one more shot. All right, there we go. Okay, so the rail side is really easy to set up, right? Okay. That should be it for the Rails side. That'll give us, well, I need to put our endpoint in there. So you'll see this in web apps a lot. The computer kind of needs to know how you'd like to access the different paths. So.
Do you have like nighttime mode set up or Flux?
What's that?
On your laptop, do you have like nighttime mode set up or like a...
You know what? I think so.
Flux, yeah.
Is it?
There you go.
Oh, hey, that's nice. Thank you. Okay, so I'm just telling it how to get access to this controller here through the route. I'm saying it's through the API, version 1, and then the resource is called test model. But then now that I'm done with that, I'm going to open up another terminal window. And I'm going to let this one start up. The command to get Rails to actually run is Rails, I think it's serve. I usually use Rails S. But, server. Okay.
Actually, his Twitch is handy for seeing his desktop closer.
Oh. Should we ask him to get weird?
Oh, no need to, because, see, I can screen his desktop there right through it.
Hmm. Well, test this real quick. So Rails is telling me that I have a problem with my file. But it's fine now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this and put our path back. We'll just truncate that. Okay, well, that was the Rails side. I'm going to move over to the Ember side real quick so that we don't waste any more time. So when we set up the front end side, we need to go into the Ember folder, and then we'll do a couple of checks. We should have had everything installed on the Ember side, but we just want to make sure that it's still working correctly, because you just gotta kind of work with it a little bit until you're got everything installed, everything up and running. And then we're going to add our authentication, make sure that's installed correctly, and then we're going to generate our model for the generate our model to match up the back end side of it, and then we'll start up the Ember server, and that will give us a URL to actually go to. So now that we'll change directory into the Ember, make sure that we have what we expect to see, and then we'll do npm install. I think that setting up a new app actually does usually take this long, and it's usually kind of things like this just happen. But I can't say that it's any different in any of the other technology stacks I've ever used. Like, it's always, this process is kind of prone to problems. And let's see, we're currently, looks like that one was good. Okay. So we did the npm install, and then we're going to run this install for the authentication. I'm going to make sure we've got that. This error is nice. It gives you nice red messages. Tells you what's it didn't like. Okay. So this will do the Ember authentication. And so what that did is it just made sure that I have my template set up, which are your front end kind of tools for viewing the actual front end stuff. And yeah, I think that's all it really did. Set up these templates, and we'll take a look at those in a moment. But the other thing I wanted to set up was Ember has its own command line interface, so I'm telling it now to generate a new, with the G command, generate a new model, call it test model to match my model on the back end, and then I'm giving it the same 3 attributes that I had on the back end. So that's going to create a file for me called test model in my models folder, and it's going to create a unit test inside of my test folder. So this is where I was talking about the Ember conventions. It's like the Ember generate is a standard thing for Ember CLI. It's not something that Wildland came up with in any way. That's just where it wants to put things. So move over from our app folder to our Ember front-end app folder, and we can see that we have a test folder. We created that file, and then we look into the app folder. We have our model that we told it to generate. And some of the things here is like this is importing from Ember data. We just call it data, and we're going to be extending that to create a new model so that everything is a base class that it uses. If I forget something, or if you guys say I need more clarification on that, let me know. And then these are the other files that the install for the authentication did for us for our front end. It's a lot of pulling in other resources and using them, which is a good thing to do for a front end. The more you can use off somebody else's work, the better, because then you don't have to do it again. Okay, so I believe that was all we needed to do for the Ember side, because most of it was done on the first part. So we're going to do an npm start, which is node package manager, and it's basically calling Ember and telling it to start up the web server for us. I think we can do Ember serve directly as well if we wanted to. Have to look into the differences there. So now what it's doing is it's going to basically have, it's delivering the Ember front end on a port 4200, but that's going to be communicating with the Rails backend that we left running on port 3000. And I think it's kind of building up, packaging up all the Ember JavaScript files into one deliverable package. And up until now, we've just been doing configuration and command line stuff. But we're going to go to the web browser in a moment. We'll do localhost 4200. And this is our web server, or our web application. So it's telling us that we've successfully built an Ember application that is working with the backend. This isn't terribly interesting, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to replace that kind of welcome message with something a little bit more useful. And so that was what I just did. I just removed the welcome message. That's kind of a default for Ember, and told it to go ahead and just start up. And so it does an auto load too, so I don't need to worry about refreshing the page necessarily. But still, now we just have a blank page. So real quick, what I'm going to do is I have a couple of steps in my slides here that go past the welcome message, and we're going to create a little bit more into the application template. And this is the handlebars that I talked about earlier. So you see these curly brackets wrapped around HTML or stuff like that. And so I'm telling it that if the session has a current user, then tell me who it is. But I'm also going to tell it how to authenticate. So I need to create a new file. This goes back to, with Ember, you kind of get some default stuff going on. So I'm going to create a base authenticated, and then I'm going to put this content in there. And it's using the Ember Authenticate Me, which is one of the open source libraries that we have that I pulled in, and exporting out as the authenticated route. And this is all just to tell the web app that when you start up, you need to log into the system. So this file right here is the start page essentially, and so you're telling it to pull some stuff in. I'm getting Ember concurrency, which is another tool that's used. I'm going to that base authentication file that I created in the routes and pulling in that authenticated route. And then I'm saying that when I extend this routed path, I need to be authenticated. And then I'll inject the session into the authentication. And it looks like I have a build error. I apologize, this is it's becoming a lot more complicated than it was. I even tested it out.
Expand the stack range, Chad.
What's that?
Click the expanded stack range, the little.
Ah. I've never seen anything like this one.
We might have swapped the quotes on you.
Ah.
Gives you the single quotes that aren't single quotes, and the double quotes that aren't. They're the fancy ones.
Right.
Yeah, the Microsoft quotes.
Well, let's try this. Just remove everything that we did. Slowly put it back. Okay, well, that's what I was expecting to see. Looks like I had a problem over here. Let's see. I have a feeling that there's some line breaks that I copied over that are not actual line breaks. This is because I'm using an editor. Okay, well, in any case, what I do know right now is that I can go through the sign up. This is, the idea of this was to get that authentication module put in so that I have an app that I could actually sign up for, get an account created, or that I could just log in with. And I did that seed data to create the account automatically. So just to show that this does work, that should show me the user, which is admin. So I could go a little bit farther, but we probably should call it quits. We're getting up to 8 o'clock, and it's been a little brutal. But I do appreciate you guys' time, kind of making me learn this stuff a little bit, as well as trying to impart some knowledge. But a couple of things to end with is that, well, except for questions, was that you really can create apps really quickly with Ember and Rails, especially if you're doing a little bit more lightweight, where you don't really care about some of this other stuff that I kind of threw in and cause problems. If you follow the guides online, there's some really great Rails stuff, and there's some really great Ember stuff, and they're working together very well. Rails is really amazing. It also works as a backend for APIs for React applications, even for mobile applications. So I think Kevin's had some experience there. So yeah. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Anything else you guys want to see or? No? Okay. Cool.
Live demos are hard.
What's that?
Live demos are always hard to do.
Yeah, I went through it last night and then I went through it this afternoon. I thought it'd be fine.
There's always a bug.
And then I know now what the thing was is I moved it all into Keynote last second from Google Slides because Google Slides is really easy to build slideshows from multiple locations, but then it doesn't present very well. So it turns out that was also not a critical component to what I was doing. So lesson learned there. Keynote will add all kinds of stuff to the thing.
Yeah. Doing live is like one step beyond production, right?
Yeah.
I'll go wrong twice as fast.
So we're currently working on a better template, and we'll see how that goes. Yeah. Leave it? Okay.
It's gonna break the streak.
Okay. Cool. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
I'm working on it. This switch, it's gonna go.
All right, guys. All right, well, thank you for coming. Thank you, Chad, for presenting. That was great. Doing live is always difficult. And thank you to our sponsors for sponsoring this meetup, Wildlands. They're going to continue to sponsor us moving forward, so that's great. Next month, we had a couple people who wanted to give talks, but they haven't officially signed up. So if you do want to give a talk, please let me know. And hope to see you guys October 3rd, the next meetup, so 6:30. All right, thank you for coming.
Wait,
Kevin asked something.
so just a shout out to one of our sponsors, Wheelhouse is having a sale on the 15th of this month. It's a big kind of super awesome discounty sale. So if you're looking for a used bike or want some parts or something like that, come check us out. They're in Richland, or no, sorry, in Kennewick, in downtown Kennewick. So if you're looking for that, that's where you go.
Right. Next.